The Aiko 475, the Aiko 495, the Longi 480, or could it be the Aiko 510, Perovskite or REA panels? Which is the best solar panel for 2026? Today we're going to be breaking that all down. Let's go. Okay, so we can see that these are all black panels and they look very, very similar, but don't let that throw you off. They're very different in the way that the actual technologies work. So allow me to break this down. The solar panel that's on my left-hand side is the Aiko 3S all-back contact 475 watt panel. When I refer to wattage, I'm referring to as the standard test conditions that you would have for each of the solar panels. And this is a 25-degree temperature and 1000 watts per square meter. So this is like lab conditions that effectively, as engineers, gives us the simulation of going, if we have these set parameters, how does this panel perform? Individual panel manufacturers then do their own independent studies of how they then compare with one another. So you can go into a little bit more information there if you want to do so. But for the benefit of today, all the panel wattages that I'll be discussing will all be under standard test conditions. So if we point them north facing, ultimately the performance of this solar panel is going to drop. Now, if we put them south facing, it's going to perform better. Different parts of the UK will also generate differently. So what is all-back contact? Well, traditionally we had what was called TopCon panels. For you and I, this was basically where we had little silvery lines that used to sit on the front of the solar panel. Now with an all-back contact, not only has the manufacturer been thinking about performance, but they've also been thinking about the look and aesthetic of the actual panels. You'll notice that these are essentially a black sheet of glass. There is no wavy little lines in front of them. So when you put them on an in-roof system or where you put them on roof, the actual finish of the panel just looks that little bit more refined. But what this also does is frees up space on the front of the actual solar panel itself. So instead of having the buzz bar on the front, actually on the all-back contact, they're able to move all of the connections together on the back of them. Depending on the manufacturer, depends on how they actually do this, but they move them to the back of the solar panel, thus freeing up more space on the front, which means they can make the panel denser and increase the wattage and increase the efficiency. And that's effectively how they're getting the most out of the panel. So that's the 475 Aiko 3S all-back contact. And this one here is its sibling. Looks exactly the same. It's 1762 high, 1134 wide, and you can't tell the difference. But on this, there's been a couple of changes. Meet the 495 3S Aiko all-back contact. Now, this is significantly more expensive than the one on the left currently. I'm not going to go too much into cost right now. I'll cover that a little bit later on because there are some different cost implications and ROI implications of kind of each choice that you're going to go and make. And I feel like I want to do them all justice first, and then I'll run through costs a little bit later on. But what's changed between this and this? The main difference is the sheer density of the panel. The manufacturer tools up a little bit differently, gets these connections essentially closer together, so the panel is significantly denser. Efficiency rises, overall wattage of the panel rises, temperature coefficient largely remains very similar, and what we essentially get is, under the same sunlight conditions, that 1000 watts per square meter at 25 degrees, an extra 20 watts worth of output. Now what will actually happen with these is the 475s are what we can get readily available, and for that note, all the panels I'm showing today are the ones that we can actively get in wholesale as it presently stands. This one, however, is just a little bit harder to get hold of. There are a couple here today actually as well that I'm going to be mentioning just a little bit later on that aren't on display here that I also want to mention, such as Perovskite panels and the REA panel as well. But let's keep going with the 495 for the second. So one of the advantage of both the 475 and 495 Aiko 3S all-back contact is their partial shading technology. In partial shading, such as like light levels of tree light or perhaps a chimney stack that comes and shades maybe a touch of the actual panel, individually built inside each one of these modules is a bypass diode. Effectively, there are three main sections. So you could shade part of the panel, and traditionally in really old solar panels, if I shaded part of a panel, we would get a hot spot on the panel, and this would essentially prevent generation from taking place. It would essentially be a bit like shutting fire exit doors as soon as it got shaded, or a bird poos on it. Instead, with the Aiko all-back contact panels, you can have partial shading and the solar array will continue to generate. So in some scenarios, you may well need micro inverters or optimizers, or we might just need to split what's called the strings, which is essentially a number of solar modules, panels as we know them, wired together. We might just need to split them up slightly to be able to mitigate shading, but it is very much on a case-by-case basis. Both of these panels have a 25-year product warranty and a 30-year performance warranty. It's really important to distinguish the two. So product warranty is effectively stuff like the black outer powder coating that's aside. What they're saying is for 25 years, they're gonna hold the color, the actual powder coating's gonna stay intact, and ultimately the look and overall aesthetic of the panel is gonna be where it needs to be. You've also then got the performance warranty, and effectively this is the rate in which the panel degrades over a 30-year basis. And these panels actually degrade very, very slowly, just over 0.38%, 0.4%, depending on the actual model themselves. So in about 30 years time, most of the ones that are around me will typically speaking be around the 85 to 88% energy retention rate after 30 years. As long as you keep them clean and keep on top of them from a maintenance perspective. So the Aiko has a 25-year product, 30-year performance warranty, whereas this one has a 30-year product warranty and a 30-year performance warranty. This is the Longi X10, all black. And you'll notice, well, this also doesn't have those little silvery wavy lines. This is because Longi have had to come to the party and start trying to compete with the Aiko, who essentially did it first. But obviously you've got patents and IP, so they create their own version, the HPBC, hybrid passivated back contact. But fundamentally, the actual technology is very similar. However, for those with a keen eye, you'll be able to see the fact that the Longi is slightly taller, and it's only 480 watts, 475 is what we're installing right now. But if we look you're going, well, I'm thinking of going for the Longi, it's 480 over 475. It's actually taller. The module itself isn't as dense. They've not been able to essentially get the science behind it to be able to get them that little bit tighter together in terms of the actual cells. So instead they're gonna go, well, we'll just nip it up 40 mil essentially, or 38 mil, in order to be able to kind of get that technology in there. We're talking like, you know, a hair's breadth between the two of them, which is why from an engineer point of view, I'm still leaning towards the Aiko. These come up marginally better in terms of like the overall output, particularly on partial shading. Unlike like normal installers where they'll have their panel of choice, I'm actually not too wed to a particular panel brand. I kind of look at what's there, what's readily available, what's on the market, what's best value for money, and really picking like really good manufacturers that are sustainably sourcing their polysilicon ingots. So when it comes to the ethics involved in sourcing your solar panel, I think is a big thing to actually give a bit of consideration towards. It's just a brief check that you can do alongside checking that your installer is MCS accredited, alongside checking that they're part of the NIC, EIC, for example, like we are. You want to actually be also checking that your solar panels are ethically sourced. The big manufacturers that are behind me are all part of trade organisations like the Solar Stewardship Initiative, whereby effectively what they're saying is, look, our polysilicon ingots, which is one of the main key components of solar panels, are effectively ethically sourced. There's also things like the ITS traceable model. I'll pop a couple of logos up on screen so that you can take a look and just double check that your manufacturer cares, because there are some manufacturers that still aren't part of these trade organisations. Might be a little bit of a lower price, and unfortunately modern slavery is still a part of the solar panel supply chain. Before I move on to the last panel in our lineup, there are a couple of panels I can't get here today. That's because I physically can't get my hands on them, despite wanting to do so. But I definitely wanted to give some airtime because they came up loads in the comments last time. Talking of comments, if you're thinking of buying solar panels, let me know in the comments below which ones you're thinking of going for. So the first one I wanted to give a bit of airtime towards is the REA panel. They actually comparatively are very similar to the Aiko and the Longi panels that are behind me. However, you can't buy an REA panel from a general wholesaler. They're available exclusively to one installer in the UK and one only from the work and research that I've done. They're imported from Australia. They actually perform quite well, but just give this some consideration. I'm not in the game of kicking other installers down, but these Aiko panels, the Longi panels that are behind me, I say the Longi are a bit more budget, but they're readily available from wholesalers. So if we get a breakage, if we have a problem, if an installer goes bust, for example, you're able to effectively pick up these panels from major wholesalers and essentially repair, make good, and work, operate and maintain on these systems. It's not just one place that you can physically go to be able to get these problems sorted. It's what I quite like about general panels and why I'm not specifically wed to a brand. I focus on the performance and just trying to get the most out of it at that point in time. Another point to note on the REA panels is some of them, and this is only some of them are DC only. This is where the solar panels generate in DC and you have an inverter on the ground floor that converts the current that you can work and operate. But some of them have a pre-glued, what's called a micro inverter, glued onto the back of them. But the problem with a pre-glued micro inverter is if that micro inverter fails, you have to replace the whole module. And for reasons mentioned earlier, it's just more of a word of caution more than anything on those. And another exciting technology that's coming up is perovskite panels. I keep hearing this in the comments. There's lots and lots of noise all about perovskite solar panels. There is a theoretical limit to the maximum efficiency that we can get out of a solar panel. And this was done by a couple of physicists called Shockley and Quasar, I think they're called. Correct me if I'm wrong there in the comments. I do apologize if I butchered that one. But effectively, there's been a lot of R&D done on solar panels, and the theoretical maximum floor limit of efficiency is about 33%. So there's not much headroom for these left to go. And the best panel that I've seen on a silicon wafer is actually only about 27%. Bear in mind, that's a scientific maximum. Whereas your perovskite panels, when they're coupled together with a silicon wafer, there is a theoretical maximum of about 10% above a silicon wafer. What this basically means in simple terms is, if we can integrate perovskite within a silicon wafer in the same surface area, we can essentially massively increase the yield that comes from that surface area. So where we've got small roofs, for example, solar panels on top of yachts, solar panels on top of cars. So that's where I think perovskite panels will come in. But as it presently stands, you can't get hold of one, you can't buy them. They're very much like a concept car. For the minute, all back contact is essentially the best that we can reasonably expect to get from main wholesalers inside of the UK. And that brings me very, very nicely onto that really tall panel that's on the right-hand side.
On the left-hand side.
Oh, okay. Your left-hand side. 475, 495, 480, and this is the Aiko 2S Plus. I'll come on to what the Plus is all about in a second, but it's a 510 watt panel. The main difference between the 2S and the 3S is essentially density of module, but this is less about density of module and more about your return on investment. I'll break costs down just in a sec, but one of the key differences is, does it 1762 high, 1800 high, 1962 high. So this is essentially 200 millimeters higher than the ones that's on the left. We're essentially getting an uptick in generation. Obviously from that one quite significant, but only 15 watts on this one. But there's also another aspect to this, which is the bifacial element to it. Let me flip these panels around and show you what I mean. Oh, I'm putting in the graph for this video, so do us a favor and like this video and subscribe for us. So we can now see the back of these two. This is a monofacial panel. And what that basically means is there's just solar cells that are on the front of the panel. However, the Aiko 2S Plus 510 has cells on the rear called bifacial solar panels. This is where the back sheet, although it looks identical to the others, is essentially translucent. So the light can penetrate through the panel, shine on the rear solar cells, and you get an uptick of generation. Now, there was someone in the comments last side that went, can I put tin foil to get extra generation out the back? Well, normally that probably isn't the case. I know some people that have painted roofs white. The brighter and lighter the tiles behind, the better that's going to reflect. Where these are not suitable for is in-roof systems. So this is where the solar panels are really tight to the back of the back trays. The light essentially can't get to the rear cells, and you may as well not bother effectively. You're going to be looking at one of the other alternative options that are available. But for those people that are going on roof, and for those people with a longer roof, talking of costs, the Aiko 475 and the Aiko 2S Plus 510 that have the same warranties, look very similar, it's 200 millimeters taller, they're about the same price. So I'm a little bit like, well, if I'm spending the money anyway, if I've got a long enough roof, and what I mean by long enough roof is real world, we want to be allowing, we're saying 1962, think 2 meters a panel, fag packet maths, plus another panel, most people have 2 rows. We then need 400 millimeters at the top to stop panels whistling away. And we want 400 millimeters at the bottom of the panel, real world, to stop rainfall and snow slides. If you've got 4.8 meters from gutter to ridge, you normally have to measure it and be quite accurate, then actually, for the same capital outlay, the same rails, the same time, the same hooks, all the same stuff, and for the same budget, we could essentially go and extract a little bit more out of our roof. So I'd be going, well, I may as well if I'm doing it at the same time. And talking of costs, actually, this is why I'd speak a little bit more about this one rather than the 495. I think as we get towards the back end of 2026, we'll start seeing these come into the fold. What happens with manufacturers when they first introduce a panel into the ether? The prices are really high. At the point of filming, and I know there'll be battles that go on in the comments on this one, but these are about 50% more expensive. For 20 watts, it's essentially not worth it from an ROI point of view as it presently stands. They're also really hard to get hold of, and the 495. But when we fast forward towards the back end of 2026, which is when you might be watching this video, I would be asking questions about this one. You may as well just be a bit like, can you get it yet? What's the costs look like? You don't ask, you don't get. On the Longi, it's very similar pricing to the 475, probably a little bit cheaper. But actually from a quality perspective, this is my engineering opinion on this, the powder coating on the edge of the Aiko panels is just that little bit better. All in all, I prefer the technology. When you kind of go behind the shell and look at the partial shading technology, and this is my own personal opinion, but I actually feel like the Aiko is a little bit better, which is why on this occasion, from a business perspective, we kind of chose the Aiko 475s as kind of our panel of choice, or the Aiko 2S Plus, actually, if you've got a long enough roof. That doesn't mean to say as time goes on, look, I believe innovate or evaporate. We've got to constantly look at innovating within this field. And if we can get the Aiko 495s for a lower cost, if we can get them when they get commoditized and bought en masse effectively, which is what's needed to push that cost down a little bit, then it's certainly something that we should be considering in the process. And actually, a super common question that I really get asked regularly, and it comes up time and time and time again in the comments, is for those people that have got existing solar systems. You know, it's maybe a feed-in tariff system that's been in 15 years, or they've got some older panels. Should I replace them? Should I upgrade them? Should I be thinking of some new panels? Which ones should I effectively go for? My personal opinion is if you've got an existing feed-in tariff system that's actually well performing, then there's no real financial justification to really be going out and ripping your whole roof apart to put new solar panels on. The reality is there's a big disparity between the capital outlay that you're going to go and spend on new panels, what you've already spent, and actually the additional savings you've made, because you don't make all the saving like a new system, you only make that additional amount. So personally, I think if your feed-in tariff system or existing solar system is working and operating fine, then I probably wouldn't consider upgrading it. I wouldn't spend the money on it, if I'm completely honest. The times and when you would consider it is, right, I'm doing a re-roof, well, taking them off and putting them back on again, that's a good opportunity to maybe go inset, for example, improve the aesthetics, improve the performance and get the most out of it. Or if you're doing a roofing repair, or if the inverter's broken, for example, or someone threw a cricket ball at one of your panels, then these are all great scenarios in which you may well think about upgrading, but actually for the mass majority of people, don't spend the money on it. You might want to consider battery storage instead. Another real key question I get asked all the time is, should I go now? Should I wait? Should I do this? I think a little bit like mobile phones, these manufacturers are constantly in a contest with each other of, we'll get another 5 watts out of it, we'll get another 0.1% efficiency. I think the reality is there's a scientific limit and we're actually reaching near the top of it. So I think another way of looking at this is if you're thinking of making the decision, like if you look at the 475s, the price is heavily commoditized on these ones. So there's some people that go, actually, it's a good opportunity for me to get what is still kind of top of the range and what's readily available for a reasonable price, or a discounted price, depending on which derivative version you go for. Or if you're kind of thinking of investing in the latest technology, think when you engage with the installer, most decent installers like ourselves have like an 8 to 10 week lead time. So like a lot can happen in 8 to 10 weeks. So sometimes what we'll do is design a system. We're constantly trying to negotiate for the better version for the same price. That's what we do. We have a buying team that effectively do that. The idea is, well, if we can upgrade, then that would be giving us an opportunity to do so in the process. Any good installer would do the same thing. So I think, to summarize, there's either a kind of a better price to be had on the latest technology, or if you want to kind of look at the future technology, maybe have a look, negotiate, pay a little bit more and go for that whilst you're at it. Other than that, thank you so much for taking the time to watch today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.